partner. Just what I need. Mr. Selfridge.
Oh, no. I couldn't.
You like me and I like you and we like the both the same. I like to change your name 'cause I love you
This little tart, Ellen Love, was not a depiction of a real woman, but rather a good representation of the many women who Harry Selfridge kept as mistresses while he was married with children. A lot of us know about the turn-of-the-century retail magnate Harry Gordon Selfridge. I have covered his amazing Rags to Riches to Rags story here on this channel. You might remember the period drama about him starring Jeremy Piven that was simply titled Mr. Selfridge. Or maybe you have even had the pleasure of shopping at his world-famous department store in London, Selfridges. I enjoyed researching a story which included a long line of women, mistresses, and frankly, I'm interested in all of them and I want to share their scandalous stories with you. So let's jump right in and talk about Syrie Maugham. Born Gwendoline Maud Syrie Barnardo on July 10, 1879, Syrie grew up in a very strict household. Her father, Dublin-born Dr. Thomas John Barnardo, founded the famous Dr. Barnardo's Home for Boys and Girls. It was a home for destitute children in London's East End. At home, he ran things like a military camp. No games, no alcohol, no smoking, no theater. But some things were allowed. Those things were daily Bible readings, strict punctuality, and obedience. Big fun. Honestly, she was reared in an environment of religious fanaticism. So it probably comes as no surprise to you that the girl wanted to leave her father's house as soon as she could. She just needed to breathe. So by age 16, Syrie was engaged. Her mother had been on her side, encouraging her to find a suitable marriage and escape. But that marriage didn't go as planned. I mean, she was able to find a man, but he had found another woman. Yeah, Syrie got engaged to a man who had a mistress, so she broke off the engagement. But in 1901, she traveled to North Africa with her father, and there, in Khartoum, she met Henry Wellcome, an American-born pharmaceutical magnate who had made his fortune selling medicines. She was either 21 or 22 years old at the time, depending on the source you read. He was 48. And they married very soon after they met, just months later in the same year. In 1903, they had a son, Henry Wellcome. They called him Monty. And I guess that if he had been born in our times, people would have said that he was a special needs child, and that made him too much for his father. So Henry sent him off to be raised by foster parents when the boy was only 3 years old. The marriage was unhappy from the start. By 1909, after almost a decade of misery, the marriage broke up, though Henry Wellcome refused to grant a divorce. Syrie could continue mixing in London society because her widowed mother chaperoned her everywhere, but she was still legally married, still trapped, and increasingly restless. Young and restless. That's when she caught the eye of Harry Gordon Selfridge, the cure for any pretty girl's restlessness. Harry Selfridge was the American retail magnate who had opened his magnificent department store on Oxford Street in 1909, just around the time that Syrie's marriage was falling apart. He was married to Rose Buckingham Selfridge, a woman from a prominent Chicago family, but he didn't act like he was married to anybody. Harry and Rose had 4 children together, but Harry had a weakness for beautiful, sophisticated women, and Syrie was both. Their affair began around 1912. Harry, who was always one to do it big, didn't just court Syrie. He bought her a house in Regent's Park at York Terrace West and paid to have it lavishly furnished with the best from his own store. She lived there with her mother, maintaining the appearance of propriety while carrying on an affair with this rich, married man. Some people claimed Syrie wasn't particularly enthusiastic about Harry, but her friend, novelist Rebecca West, wrote that it was, quote, certainly a love affair, but they were only lovers when it suited. The relationship lasted about 3 years, on and off. Harry was useful to Syrie financially and socially. She was useful to him sexually. He provided contacts and opened doors, but the longing and passion appears to have been way more on his side than hers. The affair with Harry ended sometime around 1915. By then, Syrie, still married, had moved on to someone else, William Somerset Maugham. And this man was going to make her long for her days of a boring life. He seemed like a great catch at first, exciting and famous. He was a novelist who was quickly becoming one of the most fashionable authors in London. He'd already had 4 plays running simultaneously in the West End, and he was bisexual. But it seems like he had a much stronger preference for men, which was not good for Syrie, being a woman and all. He'd once described himself as, quote, 3/4 normal, 1/4 queer. His words. But he later conceded that it was probably the other way around, suggesting that he saw his homosexual nature as more dominant. But until he could be with the man of his dreams, Syrie would do. And he was having a good old time with her in bed, and, no surprise, Syrie became pregnant with his child. Now, I know that you haven't yet heard me mention the part where she got divorced from Henry Wellcome before she and Somerset welcomed their new bundle of joy. And that's because she got pregnant with Somerset's baby while she was still legally married to Henry Wellcome. When the baby, a daughter named Mary Elizabeth called Liza, was born in Rome in 1915, she was given the Wellcome surname to maintain appearances. Well, guess what? Henry knew that that baby wasn't his because he hadn't gotten it on with Syrie in years, and he didn't like looking like a fool in public, so he struck back. He publicly sued for divorce. And he didn't just go after his cheating wife. He named Somerset Maugham as co-respondent. The scandal exploded across London society. A pharmaceutical millionaire's wife, pregnant by a famous novelist, while still carrying on in high society. The newspapers had a field day. Here's a bit of what the Times printed about it on February 15th, 1916, in a story called Probate, Divorce, and Admiralty Division. Playwright as co-respondent, Wellcome versus Wellcome and Maugham. Part of it read, in 1909, they went to New York together, talking about the Wellcomes, and thence to California in the spring of 1910. While there, the petitioner had to speak to his wife about her association with a certain man, who was not the co-respondent. She then left him and went to New York, and he returned to England. Now, that certain man could have been the Harry Selfridge. The timing is close, and with him buying her a house, the relationship would have been enough of a public embarrassment that her husband would have wanted to address it. The paper went on to say, there was evidence that the respondent and co-respondent had committed adultery at various addresses in Rome and also at an address in Windsor in July 1915. I wonder what evidence they had. Sounds nasty. And finally, the paper went on to say, evidence of adultery at Windsor having been given, Mr. Justice Bargrave Dean pronounced a decree nisi with costs and the custody of the child of the marriage. This meant that Syrie was screwed. Henry got custody of their child that he had already practically given away. Syrie got decree nisi, meaning divorce granted, but had to pay court costs. This was not a good look for a woman in the 1910s who wanted to be married, so she was stuck with the only man who would take her, Somerset Maugham. Syrie and Somerset married in 1917 in New Jersey. The papers reported on it, but always bringing up the fact how these two had just been sued by Syrie's ex-husband. Here's how the Atchison Daily Globe covered their blessed nuptials in June of 1919. Quote, when a New York newspaper reporter asked the bridegroom about the wedding, Mr. Maugham replied that his marriage to Mrs. Wellcome is a matter which does not concern the public. But when a correspondent marries the woman in the case, you can bet your last dollar that the marriage does concern the public, and it is no time for a bridal couple to act airy. End quote. So, yeah, just like the celebrities of today, soak up the spotlight when it's time for praise, but ask for privacy when they're caught doing something wrong. And just like Syrie's first marriage, this marriage was doomed from the start too, but for a different reason. Somerset was predominantly homosexual. He would end up spending most of their marriage apart from his wife. He was in love with a man named Gerald Saxton, an American man 18 years younger than him. Somerset had no wish to marry Syrie. He only did so because the divorce scandal had forced his hand. And surprise, surprise, they got divorced in 1929. Syrie's divorce settlement included their house at 213 Kings Road in Chelsea, fully furnished, a Rolls Royce, and £2,400 a year for her, plus £600 a year for their daughter, Liza. There was no big news coverage this time around. The reports were simply that they divorced on grounds of incompatibility. No 1920s newspapers would dare print that they divorced because Somerset had a boyfriend. Most women in Syrie's position, twice divorced, publicly scandalized, tainted by affairs, especially in the 1920s, they would have retreated from society. But Syrie did the opposite. Harry Selfridge had connected her with some powerful people in fashion and interior decorating when they were an item, and she had been making use of those contacts throughout her second miserable marriage. Before she divorced Somerset, she'd already opened her own interior decorating business at 85 Baker Street in London, and she wasn't just succeeding in her field. She had, in fact, revolutionized interior design. And most of this was due to her invention of the all-white room. Syrie Maugham invented what was called the all-white room. Her most famous creation was the all-white music room at her house on King's Road. For the grand unveiling, she went to extremes. She dipped her white canvas draperies in cement to create dramatic sculptural folds. The concept was radical. Before Syrie, white was considered cold, clinical, and impractical, but she made it luxurious. She proved that white could be warm, elegant, and sophisticated, and the trend exploded. By 1930, her client roster included the Prince of Wales, and she was so famous for her parties that Vogue covered them. She had shops in London, Chicago, and New York. It's fair to say that Syrie was doing great. However unlucky she was in love, she more than made up for it with good fortune in her career. But all good things must come to an end, including life. Syrie Maugham died on July 25, 1955, at the age of 76. By that time, she had transformed herself from a scandal-ridden divorcee into one of the most influential interior designers of the 20th century in an age when it was hard for women to bounce back from divorce and single motherhood. But Somerset Maugham wasn't quite done with her yet. In 1962, 7 years after Syrie's death, that wretched little creature published a memoir called Looking Back that was serialized in Show magazine. In it, he savagely attacked Syrie, trashing her reputation and dragging her name through the mud one final time. The public backlash was immediate and fierce. Even Somerset's own gay friends were outraged. The attacks on a dead woman were considered so inappropriate, so vindictive, that Looking Back never appeared in book form. But even with the memoir, he still wasn't done. The post-death disrespect continued with an attack on the daughter that Syrie shared with Somerset. As an early Christmas gift on December 22nd, 1962, this bitter clown decided to petition a court to make his daughter, Liza, return the value of every gift he had ever given her since birth. His daughter. I don't think that it gets any lower than that, but please tell me how you feel about this in the comments. You see, in April of that year, Somerset had adopted a new son named Alan Frank Searle. Alan was a 50-year-old grown-ass man, almost certainly another one of Somerset's lovers. It was a common practice before gay marriage was legalized for an older lover to legally adopt a younger man so that they could provide for them as one would for a spouse, like by leaving things in a will, things of that nature. But this was also Somerset being nasty to his daughter, not just adopting a lover, but it was more of a way to say, out with you, in with my quote-unquote son. Thankfully for Liza, the courts ruled in her favor, and Somerset died 3 years later, just before Christmas, around the anniversary of this nasty little court filing. He's not the first bitter ex-spouse in history, and he won't be the last. You know who else was a bitter ex a time or two, or three or four? Barbara Woolworth Hutton, the Woolworth heiress who got her hands on her fortune during the Great Depression. She got married 7 times, and with almost every divorce, her pocketbook got a little lighter. I published a video about her story that you can see here. I'll also leave links to it in the description box and in the pinned comment of this video. My sources for this story are on the screen.